Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching me on YouTube or on Rumble. I have a lot to say in today's live streaming, therefore, I'm alone in order to elaborate on the topics that I would like to cover. As you may know, I live in Berlin. And today, President Zelensky was in the German federal parliament, the Bundestag, and he received a long applaud by the members of the federal parliament, in exception for the party of Sarah Wagenknecht, and also most of the MPs from the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, which means the group of politicians or member of parliaments who deserted from the Linke, the left party, and formed a new party under the name of Sarah Wagenknecht, and also what they call a far right-wing group, the AfD. They weren't present here because they were calling for negotiations and peace talks instead of pushing for the same policy over and over again. And this is something that I would like to elaborate on, because I feel this video is very fascinating to me. As a politician or a group of parties, you may have a certain invested interest in pursuing a certain policy, for example. But when you see that this policy isn't really working over and over again, repeating the same policy, I think it's counterproductive. And this is why I believe that the foreign policy of the current government in Berlin is counterproductive for Germany, and counterproductive for Ukraine, because it doesn't achieve the stated goal, and that is Ukraine is going to win this war and kick out all the Russian forces from the country. So what do you do about it? Do you repeat the same policy over and over again? Do you invite Zelensky to come to the federal parliament, which should represent the German people? And as you can see, guys, that this policy of supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, it needs a lot of money, and sometimes printing money, which means inflation, and the people are paying higher bills in every aspect of their lives, including the energy bill, including the groceries, for example. So the middle class are the people who were most affected by this policy or damaged by this policy. So what happened in the past week? There were the European Parliament elections, right? And the results of these parliamentary elections indicate that the people aren't happy with the current state of affairs in their countries. And therefore, what they call, so I'm not endorsing what they call, that the far right groups have received better points, and in some of the cases, they shocked the people in power. For example, in Germany, the Greens lost big time and the AfD won big time. So this is an indication to these politicians that their policy is not very much welcomed by their own people. So repeating it over and over again is also counterproductive for their personal political, whether affiliation or also their future, right? Because they would like also to be re-elected. So it really astonishes me to see Zelensky today in the German parliament to repeat this over and over again. So one of the cases why the people voted for the right-wing party, and the majority of them, by the way, if you check the statistics, are from the class of the workers, so the labor, and also the youngsters mostly voted for what they call the extreme or far right group. So for economic reasons, many people voted, and probably for the AfD, for example, or the ideological reasons, many of the kids probably do not like this enforced ideology on them of neoliberalism and the wokeism, let's say, not neoliberalism. So there is some resistance, even though that I personally love people who are not right-wing, they are voting for the right-wing party, and this is the case in Germany. So something that I also realize. So the economic factor is important. The second factor that is important in these elections is the refugee crisis, for example. Refugee crisis is an important topic that many people have a strong opinion about, whether on the left side or on the right side. And I truly believe that the truth lies in the middle in this case. After around 9 years myself in Germany, and the core of the issue is that the European continent needs labor, especially from the youth, so they attract the migrants or the refugees to come. But worse still, when they manufacture refugee crisis, right? For example, the United States manufactured refugee crisis in Iraq, refugee crisis in Syria, refugee crisis in Afghanistan. Were it not for the American wars, the vast majority of the refugees that the Europeans received in the past 20 years would have stayed in their own countries, right? So this is something that I would like to argue against the narrative of some of the left-wing, let's say, journalists and intellectuals. Today I was reading for a Portuguese journalist, and he says, what is insane is that everyone in Europe knows our economies would grind to a halt without immigration, but we continue pretending immigration is a generous policy we adopted towards other people that we can reverse if we become less generous. And I understand the ground that he's coming from. Probably it's a moral ground from his perspective, right? But what is immoral in this open door migration policy, not for the only for the people in Europe, but also for the people in the third world countries, is that mass migration, particularly when fueled by intentional destabilization, harms the economies of these developing countries. For example, in Syria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, these countries also need this labor and these workers and probably the people with higher education. So Europeans must recognize that promoting family-oriented values in their countries would be mutually beneficial as opposed to importing foreign labor. So if the case is about labor and you need foreign labor, so you invite or you open your doors for migration, you're also sucking the workers from the developing countries, right? But this is something that the left usually doesn't see. And they don't see why this migration crisis happened and why it's happening. Why there are millions of people from Syria march towards Europe, for example, right? Or to other places. There is a reason. The root cause is the war, destabilization, covert operations, regime change wars, etc., etc. And these were all perpetrated by the United States in the past 20 to 30 years. So, of course, migration, like any country who says, I don't want any foreigner, this sounds like a racist. I totally agree with that. But at the same time, just inviting everyone to come to the European continent because you don't have enough labor here, because you're not having enough kids, this is also damaging the economies of the developing countries, right? So best formula is that the Europeans would also go back to the traditional family-oriented relationships and values and have more children instead of adopting dogs and cats, for example. And at the same time, encourage stabilization efforts in Middle East, North African countries, stop invading them, stop intervening in their domestic affairs, and keep these countries stable and let them prosper. And when they prosper, they start holding mutually beneficial trade relationship with you. You benefit and they benefit and everybody benefits. And this is the core of the multipolar world, right? So this is a point that I wanted to make because instead of talking about the reasons, the root causes, and how can this be beneficial for Europe and also for the developing countries where these migrants are coming from, it's always a case of demonization and simple making simplistic arguments about this case. For example, you have Justin Trudeau was, of course, probably shocked by the results in Europe. And he says, we have seen around the world a rise of populist right-wing forces in just about every democracy that we have seen. And it is of concern to see political parties choosing to instrumentalize anger, fear, division, and anxiety. Look what he had to say in this case.
We have seen around the world a rise of populist right-wing forces in just about every democracy that we've seen. And it is of concern to see political parties choosing to instrumentalize anger, fear, division, anxiety. My approach has always been to respond to it, to understand it and to look to solve it, to roll up our sleeves, work hard, and with ambition for this country and for our future. And I continue to be convinced that Canadians are thoughtful about the challenges we're facing and ready to see them solved, rather than just allow themselves to be have their anger amplified without any solutions offered.
So what is his solution for such cases? And I see that he doesn't necessarily enjoy much of a love and respect from you, and similarly mine. Like, I truly despise him because he's a pathological liar, and he keeps gaslighting, projecting, he's narcissistic, like so many bad, I would say, human characteristics just apply on this politician. And he's just gaslighting so many times. And I speak with, I have family in Canada, I have friends in Canada, and people always say things are getting out of control in terms of the economy, in terms of the inflation, in terms of the monthly bills that they are paying. And so these failed policies and the engagement of these countries in fruitless wars, proxy wars, like with Ukraine, with Russia, at the end of the world in Taiwan because you want to isolate China, and then you have forces in every part around the world. What are you doing? Just take care of your families, right? And take care of your country, and try to strike mutually beneficial agreements with the rest of the world, cooperate with them and benefit from them, and let them also benefit. But this is the core issue of this so-called rules-based order. It's based on lots of greed and also the intention to subjugate and dominate over the world through their financial, military, and other types of tools. So this is why many people nowadays, out of anger and out of opposition to what these politicians have done in the past 20 years, they're voting for the right wing, and not necessarily only this factor, but this is one of the factors. But am I saying that the right-wing groups are going to fix it? Of course not. I believe that there is some sort of a attempt now to empower the right-wing groups, and once they come to power, because of the failed legacy, of the economic legacy of the people who governed these countries for the past 2-3 decades, then all the problems and all the crises will happen during their time. And it will just be, then be blamed on them. Like, I'm not saying they're the good guys. I'm just saying what's going to happen. This is the circle that will happen, in my opinion, in the next 5 to 10 years. So yeah, that's why I started this live streaming with this video, so that I try to tell you that Europe is not in a good position. It's not like they are going to continue instability and prosperity if they continue in this similar path. And it's something that I don't want to see, because I also live in Europe and I would like to see a stable and prosperous Europe. And I love where I live, right? But unfortunately, so many mistakes, in my opinion, are happening. And now with the rise of the right-wing groups, it could probably the situation be worse domestically. I don't know. Maybe there would be more clashes between the social components. Let's see. I truly don't know what's going to happen, but there is so much mobilization against the right wing now that clash is almost inevitable. But I hope not, really. But about the European elections, there are people that I trust their opinion about these elections and what it means for Europe, basically. And one of them is Thomas Fazi, our friend who writes for Unheard, and we hosted him on Syriana Analysis multiple times. And he says, Europe's insurgent right won't change anything. Their elections were little more than a charade. Depending on where you stand politically, you might view the right populist surge in the European Parliament as either a grave threat to democracy or as a striking victory for it, and a major step forward in taking back control from the Brussels oligarchy. But both positions would be wrong. The truth is, despite yesterday's hysteria, compounded by Macron's decision to dissolve parliament and call an election, the impact of these elections won't be as significant as people fear or hope. Consider the victors, the ECR and ID groups, who made significant gains. Both blocs are made up of various populist right-wing parties who are deeply divided on several crucial strategic issues. Social and economic matters, European enlargement, China, US-EU relations, and most importantly, Ukraine. This means that even if they succeed in pushing the European Commission to the right, they will struggle to turn their electoral successes into political influence. On Europe's most important challenges, it seems unlikely they will vote as a bloc, both on a more fundamental level. To assume these elections will radically alter the course of the EU's policymaking agenda or even threaten democracy itself implies that the EU is a functioning parliamentary democracy. But it is not. Despite the fanfare that surrounds every European election, each one tediously described as the most important elections in the history of the European Union, the reality is that the European Parliament isn't a parliament in the conventional sense of the word. That would imply the ability to initiate legislation, a power that European Parliament doesn't wield. This is reserved exclusively for the EU's executive arm, the European Commission, the closest thing to a European government which promises neither to seek nor to take instructions from any government or from any other institution, body, office, or entity. And this inevitably includes the European Parliament, which may only approve, reject, or propose amendments and revisions to the Commission's own legislative proposals. Nor is the Commission itself by any means democratically elected. Its president and its members are proposed and appointed by the European Council, which is made up of the leaders of the EU member states. Even in this case, the Parliament may only approve or reject the Council's proposals. Hence, the paradox of Ursula von der Leyen running a comically disturbing electoral campaign for a second term despite not actually running for a seat. So basically, he's underestimating and playing down the importance of these elections and how historical it was. In my opinion, the historical reactions that we have seen in the press and by these talking heads on TV due to the rise of what they call the radical right wing, the Nazis and the neo-Nazis and the fascists are coming to power. I think one of the reasons for it, because this is an indication for what could be the next parliamentary elections on the national level in these countries, right? So when you see, for example, in Germany, you have a party like the Alternative for Germany, which has become the most popular among the working class and also among the youth. This is very alarming for the current political elites, financial elites, right? They want to keep these people away from power, but at the same time, they are gaining momentum. And these elections, it could be an indication what could come next in 2025 parliamentary elections in Germany. And if the AfD receives 25%, because last time they were, I think, 11% or so, this would be a major, major victory for the right-wing party in Germany. And similarly, you have the deserted political party from the Linke, which was supposed to be an anti-imperialist group and not to play this identity politics and become one of the snowflake political class. They decided to become more like the Green Party in Germany. So many of the people in the Linke stopped voting for the Linke, the left party, and some of the most important politicians from the Linke deserted the party and they became independent in the parliament now and formed a new political party called the Sarah Wagenknecht. And Sarah Wagenknecht, she leads this bloc, and they have, I think, received 6.5% in this current European election, and that is a big because they have been formed only a few months ago. Like only a few months ago, they declared that there is a new political party, and now they received 6.5%. So they will, I think, 6.5% or 8%. Anyways, so they have now also sit in the European Parliament, and this is also an indication that they will win 5% of the votes in the next parliamentary elections, because you need 5% in order to be in the German federal parliament. And that is big because in the current government coalition, there is a party called the FDP, or the Free Democratic Party. They may score 5% or 4%. So when one of the ruling parties could not even be in the parliament in the next elections, and the party of Zara could be in the parliament, which was only formed a few months ago. Those are big changes happening. So you see why there is this hysteria in the press. But we have the Haaretz arguing for something that I would like to show you. The Haaretz says that Israel expects far-right gains in European Parliament will rebuff criticism of Gaza war. And something like I will explain my opinion later. The Amir Tibon says Israeli officials believe the results of the European Parliament election, which showed strong gains by far-right parties and losses for the Green parties, which were highly critical of Israel, may improve the chances of buffing anti-Israeli proposals in the EU and avert significant measures in favor of the Palestinians that the left-wing parties seek to promote in wake of the war in Gaza. Israel is also hoping that the EU Parliament election results will mean that the EU's next foreign policy chief will be less critical of Israel than Josep Borrell from Spain's Socialist Party, who just this past weekend issued a harsh condemnation of the operation to free the 4 hostages and accused Israel of a bloodbath after Hamas said that at least 210 people were killed in the operation and more than 400 were wounded. So this is something that I would say I agree, but disagree at the same time. The right-wing groups have found in Israel the current me moment, the so-called left-wing parties, they are not left-wing, that most of these liberal parties were always year after year, they have something to worship. The corona times, the masks, the vaccines, and then you have the Ukraine. The right-wingers now found their current thing. And for them, there are different reasons why they unconditionally support Israel, one of which is because they don't want to be called anti-Semites, because always the right wings are attributed to anti-Semitism. So in order to keep this accusation away from them, they keep supporting Israel even more than the current, let's say, ruling elite. And if you see the political situation, like in Germany, if the current opposition, the biggest opposition, which is the AfD, I think the second biggest opposition now, because the CDU is considered an opposition. Anyways, the AfD is the only opposition in this case. So if they want to criticize the ruling coalition, they have a very big issue to criticize, and that is Germany's unconditional support for Israel, but they don't do that. This could be the biggest talking point in their next election, but they don't do that. One of the reasons, as I said, they don't want to be called anti-Semites. The second reason, many of the Christians, let's say, just like in the United States, they believe in this Zionist Christianism or Christian Zionism, and they become arch supporters of Israel without any questions. And the third category of them are people who just hate the Muslims, basically. So they choose to support, in their view of this conflict, this is between Muslims and Jews, so they support the Jews. This is in their mind, right? So those are the reasons, in my opinion. And yes, this is why they support, but this doesn't mean that the current government, which is Green Party is in power and the Social Democrats are in power in Germany. This doesn't mean that they were criticizing Israel. In the contrary, they joined the ICJ case on the side of Israel to defend Israel. And the second biggest supporter of Israel after the United States is Germany. And it's ruled by these left-wing parties. So I don't agree with the author that if the right wings come, it would be like a big shift all of a sudden in favor of Israel. The situation is already in favor of Israel when it comes to the political, military, economic support of the governments in Europe to the Israeli government here. But we're having this situation that is extremely dangerous, as I mentioned, talking about the domestic conditions in Europe, but we have also the external conditions and the foreign relationship of Europe as a bloc in the European Union vis-a-vis Russia. And at the same time, you have the American proxy war against Russia, and they are dragging all the European countries to this conflict against Russia. And one of the reasons that Russia claimed that they have invaded Ukraine is to denazify Ukraine. And this was something that has been ridiculed a lot by all these talking heads on the mainstream media, but at the same time by the press, by the politicians, is that there are no neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, and this is just a Russian propaganda. However, this week or 2 days ago, the United States lifted weapons ban on Ukrainian military unit. Look, they don't even mention the name, which is the Azov Battalion in the title. The Azov Brigade, they acknowledge and they say that they are a neo-Nazi group. So they are self-proclaimed neo-Nazi group. It's not like a Ukrainian military unit. So the Biden administration will allow a Ukrainian military unit with a checkered past to use U.S. weaponry, the State Department said Monday, having lifted a ban imposed years ago amid concerns in Washington about the group's origin. The Azov Brigade, known for its tenacious but ultimately unsuccessful defense of the Azov-style steel mill in Mariupol early in Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, is regarded as a particularly effective fighting force. But it was barred about a decade ago from using American arms because US officials determined that some of its founders espoused racist, xenophobic, and ultranationalist views, and UN human rights officials accused the group of humanitarian violations. But now the Americans decided that this group is no longer a neo-Nazi group, although the Azov themselves continue identifying themselves as a neo-Nazi group. So the definitions change, the labels change. They can cooperate with Al-Qaeda when it suits them, and then they consider it a terrorist organization, and then they support other jihadi groups in Iran, in Afghanistan, and now in Ukraine. They support these neo-Nazi groups openly. From my experience in Syria, I know that the United States supported ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups. And in order not to do it directly in the face of the entire world, they created what is called the Free Syrian Army, which is just the brand. And they supplied the weapons to these groups, and these groups either deliver them to the more radical groups in ISIS, Nusra, and the others, or these bigger groups are already stronger and they take over these weapons. So how do you see, how is it possible that all of a sudden the ISIS terrorists started using American weapons? This is the reason. And the same thing, I suspect, happened in Ukraine, that Americans said, okay, we're not going to give Azov our weapons, but we will give it to the Ukrainian armed forces. But the Ukrainian armed forces, in the Ukrainian armed forces fights the Azov battalion. Azov is part of the Ukrainian armed forces. It fights under the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. So these are just like manipulative tactics, like we're not giving them weapons, but we're giving them to the Ukrainian armed forces, but they're the same. They will, at the end, receive these weapons because they are the strongest force, and they are the most determined force to fight against Russia. Unlike, for example, in Syria, who were the most determined forces? Those were ISIS, Qaeda, and all these fanatics. So these people fight. Most of the people don't want to fight, and they are taking refuge or running away from military service, right, in Ukraine. So I would just show what Brian Barletic said in this case. I think he is a very good source of information on Ukraine and in terms of the analysis. He says, U.S. to openly arm Ukrainian Nazi Azov Brigade. Washington Post claims after a human rights review, no major human rights violations were found, clearing the unit for U.S. arms. Washington Post admits Azov founders espoused racist, xenophobic, and ultranationalist views, avoiding any mention of Nazism, but never states that these views have been reformed. In fact, Azov Brigade's unit patch, logo, and flag all still feature various versions of Nazi Germany's Wolf's Angle, as seen on even Wikipedia. So those are big provocations, in my opinion, against Russia, like allowing the Western weapons to be used inside Russia and now openly supplying weapons to a neo-Nazi group, something that they have done for many decades, political support since the end of World War II. They have been supporting these neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, and they even hired Bandera to recruit militias in Ukraine in order to fight against the Soviet Union. This was a normal practice by the MI6 and in parallel the CIA. But now they're doing it directly like in the face of the war. There is no more shame to support the Azov battalion. But they are doing it for a good reason, right? Like they're doing it because they want to preserve the sovereignty of Ukraine. They want to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine because they want to support an ally and against an aggressor, an invader. So if Russia wins in Ukraine, then Russia could also march towards Western Europe. So they have to stop it there, right? This is the reason they're doing it. But we always have Lindsey Graham who astonishingly comes and says the real reasons why his country is supporting the Ukrainian armed forces or this Nazi battalion. Take a look.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal. How Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
Ukraine is sitting on $10 to $12 trillion worth of minerals. If Putin occupies them, then he will share it with China, which means the end of the US empire. So this is why, and this is one of the main reasons why they are in Ukraine, to protect Ukraine against a dictator, to preserve its sovereignty. They want to keep the minerals for themselves. Because if Russia occupies Ukraine, then they will share it with China, and then what it basically means the end of the US empire. That's why this war is very, very dangerous, in my opinion, because both sides see it now in June 2024 as a zero-sum game up until this moment. I hope they would activate diplomacy soon and turn back to their senses, but I don't see it coming. That's why I say the situation is really, really dangerous. And I truly hope that I am wrong in this case. However, this week, the British Express, they revealed that a military expert, a British military expert, says that Ukraine could launch terror campaign bombing schools if Russia wins the war. So if Russia wins the war, he says that Ukraine is planning terrorist activity, which would see Russian schools and other civilian infrastructure targeted, an expert has claimed to the Daily Press. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been limited to striking Russian territory close to the border. Belgrade, a city just 25 miles from the border, has seen the most Ukrainian attacks in the last year. But Nicolas Drummond, a defense and security analyst, tells the Daily Express that Ukraine is planning much more damaging attacks. He says Ukrainians could launch terrorist activity in Russia, including the bombing of schools. So this was something that has already been done in the past, right? Even I don't think that this ISIS-K terrorists who committed it, this heinous terrorist attack in Moscow, have acted independently. In this case, there was certainly cooperation between them and other foreign intelligence, and I'm not saying particularly Ukraine, but it's a suspect, the least to say, right? So those are the ways that we are going closer and closer to the edge, like allowing Ukraine to use weapons inside Russia. They could hit some of the nuclear facilities. It would trigger a response. We have the plans for terrorist attacks inside Russia, sending NATO troops inside Ukraine, and so many other verbal, I would say, loud voices coming from the European continent, especially among the political elites, pushing insanely again to achieve a certain victory against Russia, which could blow up on their faces. And it's really sad to see that there are no important, influential peace voices in the European continent. In contrary, we always see people like von der Leyen coming and saying things like this.
Kharkiv is Europe, Ukraine is Europe, and our union is your home. Slava Ukraini. Long live Europe.
It's almost satirical when you watch how she speaks, and you start seeing things differently when you know that politicians like herself do this like the lying for a career, and you know that this is not in the interest of Ukraine, and you know that Zelensky is either a hostage now for NATO countries to continue doing what he is doing or has done, because he ran on a peace platform in 2017, right? 2019. Now, there is no encouragement for diplomacy with Russia. So what is the alternative except for escalation and tit for tat? We are every day walking slowly but surely into a very devastating big war. And as you remember, when I hosted Dr. Thomas from Helsinki and he spoke about the structure, it's crazy when you see like the reasons. What are the reasons for this, right? I don't know if you watched that part. Many people watched it and they were fascinated by his explanation. But I can play to you this segment that I had with him, and it's fascinating actually. I will show you because there is no other way of seeing this anymore. So I will play this for you. What happened, in my opinion, in 2022, the provocation of the NATO countries were deliberate, and they wanted for the Russians to invade Ukraine. This is in my understanding. I can be wrong, because they thought that once the Russians invade Ukraine, it will become a quagmire for them, the Afghanistan 2.0, and they will drain and crush the Russian economy and the ruble. They will turn it into rubble, etc., because they have a dominance over the financial institutions, the SWIFT, the sanction regime, etc., etc. And the type of weapons that they supplied to Ukraine, they thought they will deter the Russians. So they told Zelensky not to sign a peace treaty. This was in early 2022. And Zelensky went along the Americans and the Brits. But this was the illusion, right, in 2022. Now we're in mid-2024. Even the American officials, they know that Ukraine cannot win this war. They know that pushing the Russian forces out of Ukraine has become a mission impossible for them. However, they still support Ukraine with military equipment, ammunition, and although Ukraine lacks the manpower and also cannot compete Russia's ability to manufacture armaments and or repair the damaged armed equipments, right? So if the end result is a quagmire at best and a defeat for Ukraine at worst, then what is the grand strategy of the United States here? Continuing the war in this senseless way, it doesn't look like, for me, a strategy. They don't have an end game, a point where they can say, now let's sit on a table to negotiate. We achieved something here. What is the goal of the Americans now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've been pondering that a lot, and I don't think this is just the Americans. It's Europeans too. If you look at, for example, what von der Leyen has said and all that. But the problem or the issue is that I at least find it hard to find a proper explanation for these atrocities to continue. Like, I think there's maybe three plausible, aims or scenarios you can sketch here. The first one is that this was my original thinking in late, or let's say mid 2022, that the Eurasian alliance had become a threat to the US hegemony in the world. And it was actually one of the most influential political scholars, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who already in 1997 formulated the strategy that the U.S. should dominate the global scheme or global realm through Eurasia.
Yes.
And the idea that Eurasian alliance was forming, it was becoming too big of a threat to US, could have been one reason why they needed the war in Ukraine. And why it continues is that because you cannot, if you stop it, Russia and Europe will make peace and everything will return to normal or the way it was. So this is one plausible explanation. I think the second one is that, well, and there's always that at war, it's difficult to get wars ending when you start one. It's just there's something in their nature. They just tend to keep going. But then there's this that economy is about to collapse, and they want the war to cover it. And this would not be the first time in history that this happens. But it's getting this is a rather macabre explanation already. But it's one we need to consider. And then there's a third one, which is again very speculative, but which is something I've been forced to ponder, let's say, for the past 8 months, that there is some powerful group somewhere in the world behind the scenes, which for some very dark reason wants this war. So, and if we look at how systematic this is, how this is pushed everywhere, like it's not the US, not just Finland, it's France and Poland and Estonia and all that. So why are they talking? Where is the peace movement, for example?
Yes.
Where are the leaders who would be pushing for peace? Like, and all European history, if it says one thing, it says do not go to war. That's a one. If there's one lesson in all European history, that's it. Do not make war. It doesn't yield anything good. And yet there's missing. It's missing the whole peace movement. So if we factor in this, and the fact that if there's a systemic thing, these are not just stupid voices talking the same thing all over Europe. This is a systematic thing. And if something is systematic, in statistics, it implies there's a structure which is unseen in the analysis. And you mistakenly think it's an error. But when it's systematic, it's not. There's structure. So now we need to ask, what is the structure behind all this that is pushing the war? And it's for me, it looks that it's something invisible. We cannot observe it, but it's there.
Yes.
So I've been looking a long macroeconomic time series for 20 years. And it's and I specialize in stochastic time series, which there is some trend that pushes the time series around. There is a feeling of something similar. There's something behind we cannot observe for some reason. But the systematic progress of things, or everything that is said, and the very deliberate escalation and crossing of Russian red lines hints that there is a structure pushing for this conflict into a wider war. And that is extremely troublesome conclusion. But I'm having difficulties finding any other plausible explanation anymore. And yeah, and then we really need to ask, what is this structure? What is it doing, and who's in it?
I've been trying to learn about the Ukraine war since 2014 when the coup happened, and I received and hosted many experts on this case and listened to many experts on televisions and YouTubes. This was the most comprehensive analysis I have ever heard. The first reason could be about the rise of the Eurasian countries and the economic integration between China, Russia, and then in parallel Russia with Germany, which means the prosperity that will prevail in this area would reflect positively on all these major players like Russia, China, Europe as a continent with Iran. And this was very scary for the United States. So they wanted to draw the line in Ukraine and separate the European family from its sister in Russia. This is the first explanation. The second one, that the politicians know that economic crises are coming soon. So they will blame it on a war. So they are actively searching for a war. And the third reason is that he mentioned that there is a structure that is hidden from the analysis that you cannot really observe, but the systematic development of the events into escalation indicates that there is a driving force behind this escalation. Some dark force wants to create war between these powers. And who is this hidden power? Myself, I don't know. But it looks like there is like the reason is not like one or another. It's like it could be a combination of these three. But I would not rule out the possibility that there is a dark force pushing and escalating into a big war between these powers. And that is very scary. And that is something that the Serbian president, Vucic, and I know that he doesn't particularly also enjoy much of a love and respect from your side. And I'm not here to judge him, but he is correct on this case when he says that all signs point to a major war in Europe. He says we are heading for a major catastrophe. And it seems that the train has already left the station and can no longer be stopped. No one in the West is talking about peace anymore, only more war. This is what he had to say in this case. Take a look.
The train has left the station and no one can stop it. And it looks like that, and I believe that we are getting close to the last days of possible rethinking and reconsidering of everything that is happening in Ukraine. If those big powers don't do anything in a short period of time, yes, I'm pretty much certain that we'll face a real disaster. If you bet on a fact that someone is bluffing, it means that you have no better cards. But you just believe that the other side has weaker cards, and you're not sure about it because you don't know and you didn't see his or their cards. Everybody is speaking only about war. Nobody wants to reach the peace. Nobody speaks about peace. Peace is almost a forbidden word. And please notice this. Because they say we need to win in order to secure future peace, but nobody's speaking about a peace, and then okay, you negotiate it. But you have the other side. You have to have the other side on the table as well. It's it's very strange to me that no one is actually attempting to stop the war. There is another theory, which I can understand, which I don't say that I do approve, but I understand that West thinks that they can win easily against Putin. They want to exhaust him in Ukraine, and then they will enter the space, and then Russia in today's territory and shaped like it is today won't exist anymore, and Putin will be overthrown and everything else. Yeah, maybe that's possible, but
do you think that is possible? Is it possible to use Ukraine to weaken Russia?
Well, it weakened Russia anyway. But is it enough to destroy Russia and to overthrow Putin? I don't believe so. In today's Europe, they all act like big heroes. but they did not say to their people that they will pay a very big price. And speaking about it, you and all these leaders should do absolutely everything in order to stop any kind of warmongering behavior and everything. Why I'm speaking that we are getting close to the precipice, to the abyss. Analyze the situation of NATO and the United States. They cannot afford themselves losing war in Ukraine, which means Russia cannot win. Because, first of all, their political legacy will not exist, or it will be so poor that they cannot allow themselves. Number two, position of Europe and the West, collective West, in geopolitical terms, will deteriorate so much that no one would be able to revive it and to renew it. And number three, it will open Pandora's box for more movements, at least, and hostilities against collective West in the future. But take the other side. That's a nice story for one side. But take the other side. If Putin loses the war, Russia will not exist and won't be shaped like it is today. I mean, when you have these two sides so much far from each other, with their wishes, with their expectations, then you see that everything is at stake. Everything. No one can afford to himself or to itself, to themselves, to lose. When you have this situation, that's why I was saying to you, that's why I was saying publicly and not hiding it, that we are getting closer to a real disaster.
Sorry.
Who is ready to lose 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 and 15 million people? Ask yourself. I'm not ready to lose a single man, and we won't participate in that. But it's a question for some other people.
How close are we now to a third world war, a confrontation?
I cannot say a third world war, but that big confrontation, how far we are, I believe that we are not far away from it. Not more than 3-4 months. And there is a danger to happen even before that.
Where do you stand in this whole insanity? Where does Serbia stand in this conflict?
We'll keep peace, stability and tranquility within the region and in our country.
That's a quite scary prediction from him in the next 3 to 4 months, and that is we're speaking about a few weeks, and I hope he is wrong. But he says, I think the West is wrong. Both sides now believe it is existential for them, so I don't think they will find a solution other than war, and everything is at stake. In Europe, the leaders act as the big heroes, but they are not honest and do not tell their citizens that they will pay a big price if it comes to war. And this is one of the reasons why people have voted for the right-wing groups, because they are their approach is different on Russia. They see themselves as a natural extension, or Russia is a natural extension of Europe, and they also see in Russia more of a conservative, traditional, value-oriented country, just like they want to adopt in their countries. And some of them are critical of NATO and the US dominance over Europe. There is this and that, but they're very, very bad on Palestine, for example. I'm just so that everything would be clear here. And the main issue, in my opinion, is the underestimation, and these politicians and the so-called experts on mainstream media outlets keep telling us that we shouldn't be intimidated by Russia's threats because this is just they are bluffing. Don't believe them. They're not going to do this and that. But to be honest with you, Russia is changing its military the type of trainings and the drills that they are doing, and they're preparing themselves for what could come next. And that's scary. You don't want to be in war with Russia, with a nuclear country. And one of the ways that Russia is responding to this, that they began the second stage of their tactical nuclear forces drills. So Russia and Belarus did the same. Together, these exercises come amid Western escalation in the Ukraine conflict. NATO is now openly helping Ukraine attack pre-2014 Russian territory. So what the Russians basically are doing in this case, they are doing joint exercises on nuclear exercises, tactical nuclear forces drills with the Belarus. And this is enough reason for me to believe that they are at least hypothetically and theoretically getting ready in case of direct confrontation. Take a look. So, joint military drills between Russia and Belarus on tactical nuclear war, which is, in my opinion, unpleasant thing to think of. If there is any chance for a peace, and if there is any chance for third countries to intervene in this case, it's time for them to do. And especially stronger countries, bigger countries like India, like China, like Brazil, like South Africa, there has to be a way to find a way out of this conflict. If it's going to end in a nuclear exchange, then I think that this is not in the interest of anyone. And if anyone thinks that blowing up the world is a good idea because some arrogant people are very arrogantly, their drive is power and money and influence and this and that. If you think that 8 billion people should die because of a conflict over multipolarism, I think you're mistaken. So we shouldn't really say that this is a bluff. And this week, we've seen the reports. People were claiming that Russia has sent a nuclear ship to Cuba. And I just want to clarify this because I think it's not correct news. And our friend Fiorella from Moscow, she had a tweet. She says, sick of hearing a heap of fear porn about Russia sending missiles to Cuba from sensationalist Western media and pundits who aren't familiar with routine Russian operations or ongoing operations with Cuba. Here is the truth. The ship don't have nuclear weapons, and Cuba had notified Washington about their arrival a while back. This doesn't change NATO escalations, as part of Russia have been attacked by Ukraine with US weapons that were set up and often directly operated by US service members. Additionally, Russia has retaliated multiple times at troops attacking it, including Western ones. I know sensationalism and fear porn gain clicks and traction, but make sure to stay in reality because this helps no one by the way, if anyone is going to use nuclear weapons, it's going to be the only country that has used them before. So there are no Russian nuclear ships to Cuba, just in case you were wondering in this case. Guys, today I was checking on the YouTube statistics. We are around 800 subscribers away from 70,000 subscriptions. That would be an amazing help for me. If you are watching this live streaming, please consider subscribing if you like the content. And rest assured that I do my best to bring to you quality comments, analysis, and news, and try to read through the lines and analyze to you what's happening around the world. I consider this a duty and a job at the same time. So if you want to support this independent podcast, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis. I will see you guys on Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.